Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring a full beginner socketio tutorial. But I have like a video on my channel, it's a series on my channel where I teach you guys how to build kind of like a chat app using React and Node and socketio. However, since I haven't made a real beginner's video introducing the library, introducing how to work with sockets, I decided to make this one. It's going to be a very simple application. However, this is actually what I built to kind of like make me get how sockets work. And the idea here is very simple. I have here two users, so they're in separate tabs, right? Obviously, it would work in separate computers as well. And this user would send a message here like, please subscribe. And I wrote this wrong, but yeah, and I clicked on send message, and this user right here, it would be emitted and broadcast to every other user but itself. And this one received please subscribe. If I send okay, I was already subscribed, and I send this to this one would also receive the message, right? And I'm not gonna, this isn't a chat app, so for example, if I change this to like the video too, and I send this message, it will replace, because I don't want to complicate this tutorial by adding like fancy JavaScript. This is totally based on a very simple UI and how sockets work both in the front end and in the back end. So let's get into the implementation of this application. Okay guys, so I have here my simple application opened up, and you can see that this isn't much. There's nothing actually. I only have an index.js, which is where we're going to start our server, and I have a home.ejs. And that's like, it depends on what you want to do. I use, when I don't use something like React and I just want to have a very simple front end, I use EJS. You can use HTML, you can use whatever you want. I use EJS because I find it, I don't know, I'm used to it. But you can see it's the same as HTML. It's literally the same, right? And if you don't know how I created this, the way I did it is, I'm gonna even like close this. The way I did it is basically I came over here to my terminal and I said yarn init and pressed enter, and then pressed enter to all the different questions that they asked, and then like all my packages were installed, and the only thing I had to do was create index.js, this file right here, by right clicking new file. And I also created a folder called views, and I created the home.ejs file. So in this tutorial I'll be showing a bit of setting up EJS, which is like one line of code. So if you're not using EJS, just ignore it. It won't interfere, like it won't do anything to the project if you're not using it. So now we have to install our packages. So the packages I'm using here are very simple. The first one is yarn add express, right? I'm using express. If you're using npm, just say npm install express. But the other one is socket.io, which is the main library we're going to be using to create our sockets. I already installed this, so I'm not going to install it again, but please install it because it's basically what we're going to be using. And now that we have this, let's start actually building our server, right? So I'm here inside of my index.js, and I'm going to start by creating a very simple Express server. However, it's going to be a little bit more modified from what we usually, like if you usually create REST APIs with Express, this is going to be a little bit different. So let's create the Express server. Const express equals to require express. Then we're going to come over here and create our app like we always do. Const app equals to express, and like this. But then instead of just saying app.listen at the bottom, we're actually going to create a variable which is going to be an instance of an HTTP server that we're going to create. So let's call it server, and going to be equal to require HTTP. And we're going to say .create server and pass the app that we just created right here. So this is how we're going to start and initialize our socketio server, right? And then we're going to create a variable called io, and you can call it whatever you want, but usually you call the initial value io and the socket. So that's kind of like the standard. And you set it equal to require socket.io. And then you have to pass kind of like the properties for this socketio server, which is going to be passed with a parenthesis right next to it. And we're going to pass two things. The first of all is just the server, the variable that we just created. And then is if you want any options, like anything related to cores, you can pass over here. I'm going to pass some cores like properties, just to make sure that we have no CORS error. I honestly don't know if it's gonna cause any, if you don't put this, it's not gonna cause any errors, because I've had errors in the past. I'm just gonna say that I wanna set CORS to allow everything to work here. And this is basically saying that, like, I don't want it to cause any issues. And I don't exactly know if it's gonna cause any issues if we don't do this, but honestly, I like doing this because I'm not actually using CORS in this project specifically. So I'm just scared that it's gonna cause issues to you guys. So let's make sure that no one will get any errors related to CORS, because they are super annoying. Then what I want to do is basically I want to create the app.get, and the get is basically going to render my page just so we can see the HTML. Let's make it so it's in the route home. You don't need to do it exactly like this. I'm just rendering my HTML so that we have an idea, right? And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say res, and I'm just going to very simply render my page, right, with using the res.render function. And again, I'm using EJS here. So what EJS does is, when I say res.render, it looks for a folder called views over here, which is something we're gonna implement. And if whichever name we put over here, for example, I'm gonna call this home. Like if the file is called home, which apparently I called it home, it's gonna just render this one. It knows it's this one. So we don't need to do anything over here other than just this. And this is how EJS works. But again, note it doesn't even, your project doesn't even need to render your HTML from the server for this to work. You can just create an HTML file and do all that stuff separately. And at the top here, I'm just gonna app.set view engine, just so we finalize like everything related to EJS. So view engine, and we're gonna set it to be EJS, so it knows it's like, it knows we're using EJS. But that's it for EJS. If you're not using EJS, then we're done here with the part where I set this. And now we can actually tell our server to start, right? Server.listen, and we're gonna put 3001, and we're gonna just come over here, and basically whenever our server starts, we want to just console log a message saying server running. By the way, I just remembered that I actually also have nodemon installed. It's not necessary, but if you want to install, say yarn add nodemon, and like just install nodemon, or if you're using npm, you can use npm install nodemon. And then what I do is I come here to my package.json, and by the way, ignore the other dependencies that I have installed here that has nothing to do with the current project. I just reuse the same project 1,000 times for different videos. But yeah, to make nodemon work, you can just come here to the script tag, and if there isn't any script tag, create a script tag exactly like this, and you just set start to have nodemon start. And now what you can do is you can say yarn start, and the server will actually run, as you can see right here. And if you refresh here your server, it's going to restart the server. That's just something that is really cool with nodemon, and I recommend using it. But now we start actually building our socketio functionality, right? So our socketio logic. With socketio, what you do is you have this variable called io, right? And what you basically want to do is you want to come over here and just set io.on, and you want to, it's kind of like an event emitter, like you can see right here, right? So in Node.js you have event emitters, and you can set an event that we're gonna basically be listening for. And what this does is whenever we want to set an event for just like a person connecting to our server. So we usually call it connect or connection. You can call it whatever you want. Whenever someone opens up our HTML file, we're gonna set and emit a connection. So that's the idea. We're gonna say, okay, someone connected to this, okay? So this is how this io.connection works. And over here you can grab from that connection a socket variable. And this socket variable is what we're gonna be using to create all of our socket, kind of like all of our different things that we're going to be using in our sockets, right? So we can set different events, we can set different pipelines that we're going to actually send the data. So that's basically the idea. So what this does, and like basically, is just that it just connects, right? It's just we're setting a connection. And over here, we can actually start creating our socket like variables, right? But before we actually do that, I want to start connecting our frontend to socketio. And why do I want to do that is because I want to show you guys how it actually works, how like people connect. And one thing that is important is each socket has a different ID. So a socket is a person, almost like it's a connection, and each connection to our project has a different ID. So I want to show you guys exactly like the people, like the how it works when someone connects. So when I say socket.id, it's gonna console log the ID of the person, and this is going to console log every time like there's someone enters into our room. I'm even going to pass like a message here saying user connected, something like this, and we're gonna see exactly when someone connects to our socket, right? So I'm just gonna refresh this, and let's come here to our home.ejs, which is our HTML. And there's something really important to connect to socketio in your front end. You have to actually make the connection, right? So I'm using the CDN from socketio. I'm gonna leave this in the description if you want to copy this. You just copy and paste this script, and every time you enter into your page, it's gonna download this script, meaning it's going to actually not download, it's just gonna make the connection to socketio client, and we're gonna be able to use socketio in our front end. So now that we have that done, we can actually create a script tag here, which is going to be our JavaScript. And inside of here, we want to start creating our connection to socketio. So in the front end, what we can do is we can create a variable called socket and set it equal to io, which obviously we don't like. It's like this io variable right here. It's coming from this CDN right here. So we're gonna set it equal to io, and over here, very simply, we just need to pass our local host. So the URL to our server. I'm gonna pass localhost 3001, which is where our server is running, as you can see right here, 3001. Yeah, 3001. And now we established a connection to our socket server. And what we need to do now is we can actually use this socket variable to emit and receive all the different events that we created in our socket server. One of the events we created was connection. It's called connection, as you can see right here. It basically starts our IO, like our socketio server. It connects a person to our server. So to establish that connection, we can just come here and say socket dot on, and we can pass the same name that we passed over there, connection, and literally this will connect our user to like whichever user loads this JavaScript or this HTML file. They're gonna listen to this event over here, and we can say something like, actually, like it doesn't really matter. We can even I'm actually not even going to pass any function here. I'm just gonna say socket on connection, and this over here will establish a connection, right? So let's actually look at this. I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna refresh the page. There's no HTML now, but as you can see, I imagine nothing is console logged here. But since I just refreshed the page for the two users, I imagine that my console log should have two IDs logged. And as you can see, it actually has 4. But let's take a look. I'm going to close this server, clear my page, and let's start the server again. Let me start my server again. Yarn start, server running, user connected because we are already logged in, and user connected already logged in. So since our HTML browsers here are already like opened, you can see clearly that the user has actually connected. As you can see right here, it says user connected and the ID. If I refresh the page, another user will, like this one has been disconnected, and another, like it connects again with a different ID. That's the idea, right? We also might want to have a disconnect, but I don't want to confuse you guys, so I'm not going to even implement the disconnect in this video. But you can see that now we have established a socketio connection. So this is how you actually do it. But now what we want to do is we actually want to have an input over here and a button, and remember, we just want to send some messages to the other person, right? So to do that, I'm actually going to come into our body here in our HTML, and I'm just going to create a very simple input. So this isn't anything to do with actually socketio. I'm just creating an input, and let's give it a class name of, I don't know, message. Is going to be, we're going to send a message, right, to the other person. So we're going to create an input, then a button, and this button is going to say send message. Okay, So this is the idea. And if we refresh the page over here, you'll see that now the input and the button appears here. So what exactly do we want to do with this button? Well, we want to have some sort of event on our socket that basically sends a message and an event that receives a message. So to do this in socketio, it might seem a bit confusing in the beginning, but you guys will understand as we get into it. So we have to write all of our logic inside of this io.on connection in our backend. Why? Because this is where this is actually where everything happens, because we only want to emit and receive events if the person is actually connected to our socketio server, right? And inside of this is the only place where we actually have access to this socket variable, which is the variable we're going to be using to emit messages or send data or receive data, right? So the logic for receiving and sending messages is pretty much the same for every single project that you want to send and receive messages. The idea here is we're going to use the socket variable, and we want to kind of like wait for, so the on property, basically the on method is just saying that we want to receive this event, and the emit property wants to send the event, and we're going to be using the emit property later. But what event do we actually want to receive here? Let's create an event called message, and when you receive a message, what you want to do is you want to grab the message, like some data that you received from this event, and we can pass this data in our frontend. And we want to do something with this data. We can console log this data right now, and it should work. But we actually want to do something else. And what exactly do we want to do? We want to actually emit this data. We want to emit it to everyone but yourself. And this is going to come in handy later. I'm going to show you guys. But before we actually do this, I want to actually just show you guys that when in our frontend, if I emit an event called message and pass some data to it, it's going to come over here because this is constantly listening for if the event has been emitted or not. And it's going to console log whichever value we pass there. So let's come here to our home.ejs, and I'm actually going to, just so you guys can see it, I'm going to come over here and I'm actually going to emit this, right? I'm actually going to create a function called send message, and this function will basically be the function that is going to be called when I click on the button, right? When I press the button. So for now, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to say socket.emit, and we're going to emit to the message event, and we're going to pass here some sort of data. For now, let's just call it, hey, it worked. So we're going to pass just a string that is a message saying, hey, it worked. So let's actually pass this function to this button. So on click, let's call it send message. So when you click on this button, you're going to send the message. And let's open up here this thing, and let's refresh the page here. Let's just click on the button and see if the hey, it worked is console logged into our server. When I clicked on this, you see it says, hey, it worked. And why exactly does this happen? Well, because in our front end, we emitted a message. When we say socket.emit and we pass the name of the connection we want to emit it to, we can pass some data inside of here, so that now in our backend, whenever they are in the socket.on and the event is message, it's going to wait for whenever someone emits to this event, and when someone emits to this event, it's going to grab some data, and for now it's just console logging the data. But what exactly do we want to do with this data? We actually want to do something a little bit different. We don't want to just console log the data. We want to actually, whenever someone emits this data, we want to emit it again, but to everyone else. So I emitted this message to my server, and I want this server to broadcast the message that I received to everyone in the connection, everyone in the server, but myself. So to do that, we're going to be using, we're going to come over here actually, and we're going to say socket.emit. And we're going to pass here again the message, and the message that we're going to pass here is actually the data that we received. So I know this seems kind of counterintuitive, but think about this. In the front end, we emit this message right here, and then it comes here to the backend because we emitted. It says, okay, so we received some message in our message event. So what we want to do is we want to actually emit this message back, right? We want to emit this message to everyone else. But currently, that's not actually doing it because we actually want to broadcast this message to everyone but ourselves. If we just leave it like this, what is going to happen is actually we are going to receive our own message. So what I want to do is actually want to use a function called broadcast. And when we say socket.broadcast.emit, what it's going to do is it's going to send to everyone but ourselves. So when we do this, it should be working. However, again, this isn't all we have to do. We actually want to see the message that we are sending, right? We want to actually see the message. So what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to come here to our home.ejs, and I actually want to check to see if we actually received the message. So if someone received this this broadcast, right? So let's say socket.onMessage, and obviously we're going to receive some data because we're sending data from the backend. And the idea here is that whenever I receive the message, I want to have an h1 tag over here, a header tag, which I just want to change its value to the data that we receive. So I have a header tag over here, and let's create it, an h1 tag, which currently doesn't have anything. But when we receive the message, I want to set whatever message we receive to be inside of this, so that if I refresh this page, you'll see that this message will appear, right? But we want to initialize it as empty. And what I want to do here to do that is actually I'm going to be using a bit of JavaScript. Very simply, I'm going to use the document.query selector, and I'm just going to query for the only h1 tag that we have in our page, so he knows that we actually want to use that one. And I'm just going to say that I want to change its inner HTML to be equal to data. If you don't understand this part over here, then I honestly recommend learning like the basics of query selectors, of document, of managing the DOM in JavaScript. This is basic JavaScript, and before actually getting into using socketio, because socketio is basically just like it's a bit more complicated than basic JavaScript. So I definitely recommend learning how this works. But we actually the only thing this does is it changes the value for our h1 tag to be equal to the message that we received. So let's check if this works, because currently what we're doing is we're just the message that we're sending is something like predetermined. It's saying, hey, it worked. So in theory, with the way we kind of like created our backend, what happens is when I click on this button, I imagine that it should actually and I'll refresh this as well. When I click on this button, I imagine that this over here should display, hey, it worked. Let's see if it works. And as you can see, it was this message was broadcasted to this server right here. And if I click on this, it should do the same thing. But this isn't all, but it means it's working, but this isn't all. Remember that I said that I actually want to write the message over here, and that's the message that I want to emit. So now all we have to do is just write a bit of JavaScript. We're done with the socketio logic to actually make this work. So what we're going to do is, in this send user function over here, instead of just emitting, hey, it worked, we're actually going to grab the message, like whatever is written inside of our input here, and we want to emit exactly that. So let's say const, and I'll call it something like message input, something like that. And we're actually going to grab we're going to say document.query selector, and we're going to grab the element with the class message, because remember that our input over here has a class of message. As you can see, we're just saying that like we want to grab the input that has that message. So now this represents that input, but now we want to grab the value for that input. So let's come over here and create another variable called message. It's going to be equal to just message input dot value. Simple as that. We're just grabbing the value from that input. And now this is exactly this variable right here, message, represents exactly what we wrote in this input. And I just want to pass it over here. Message. And now we're sending the message that we wrote to our server. So let's refresh this, and let me refresh this as well. And now let's just come over here and say hope this was a good video, and I want to send this message. And you can see that now we received this message on every other, and I felt like if I came over here, imagine, and I just close this and I'll make it even smaller, you'll see what broadcast actually does. I'm going to create a new tab over here, and I'm just going to put it over here. I know this looks ugly. We have three tabs open, but this is just for demonstration purposes. You'll see what happens. I'm going to load localhost 2001 here /home, which is the route we are in, and I'm going to refresh everyone's page. As you can see, I'm gonna send a message from this one. I'm gonna say something like Pedro, that's my message. And you'll see that both of these received the message, but this one. As you can see, both received. Why did both receive? Well, because we're broadcasting to everyone except yourself. And if I send from this one, I want to send something like, hey, not only will this one receive, but this one will receive as well, and it's going to change this value to hey, as you can see right here. So we're just broadcasting this message. When I send this, both of them receive. It's everyone receiving the message but ourselves. So that's the idea, right? And this doesn't need to be in the same computer. I'm just opening and I just have the same browser because like it's a video, but you can have this in different computers, and if they're like all connected to the same socket server, then it will work. So yeah, that's the basic idea. This is very simple socket logic in the backend here, and I know it might seem a bit confusing. I definitely understand that it might seem a bit confusing, but believe it or not, like it will get easier as you start understanding. If you look better, like if you look at the logic, you try to implement it yourself without just copy and pasting, you'll definitely start understanding, oh, that's why we did this. This is why we did this. Because I know it looks weird, but this is actually how you this is how you structure your logic using sockets, or at least socket.io. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. I answer every single question. My subscribers know this. Please leave a like in the video, subscribe because I'm posting almost every day, and I see you guys next time.